or what are we going to do? Why are we addressing this topic right now? I learned a long time ago that there's certain topics that you can talk about, and if you talk about them, people will be immediately interested. So at one of the summer camps that at the Mount Hermon camp that some of us have gone to, they'll have these seminars, and people will sign up for the seminars. And I'll look at the sign-ups, and if you want to draw a good crowd of people, if you talk about making your marriage better, about raising your kids, or like talking about what's God's will for my life, that those seminars seem to get a lot of interest. And then I'll look at all the seminars that are out there, and there'll be the other ones like how to have like a really intense prayer life or becoming a missionary. And I'll look at those and think, oh, I wish more people would go to that. And then we all go to the other ones about helping your marriage, right? But we think that would be a good thing to do. Now, I think what we're talking about right now about the soul actually is kind of really at the heart of so many of these issues. And we'll discuss this and talk about it in just a bit. But that if we have a healthy soul, that so many of the issues that we have in our different relationships and figuring out God's will and all that kind of stuff, that those become a little clearer. So I think this is really, really at the heart of all this. Before we started the church, so this is like 20 years ago, I went to talk to one of my seminary professors, who was probably like the smartest guy I ever met. And he had been a pastor, and he had planted a couple churches. So I wanted to ask him for some like advice on if I'm going to do this, and what can you tell me that will be helpful. So I went over, and he's like really busy, so I was able to get about 30 minutes in with him, and I told him what we were going to do, and I asked him for advice. And then he told me, it was the most important thing, the best advice I can give to you is to work out your own baggage. And I heard that, and I thought, that's odd, or that's interesting. That's not what I was really expecting. What else is there? And when he was saying that, I mean, he was talking about kind of not only a baggage in the way that we're all raised in our family, but really kind of like our baggage with God. How do we see God, and how's our relationship with God? And maybe the false ideas we have or the experiences that we have can color that. And to work out our own baggage with ourselves and with God is really the most important thing to do. But when he told me that at that time, I was a little bit disappointed with the advice. But as I went through and was a pastor and did all these things, I realized that he was right, that when I took a deeper look at the problems that I had and why either people would get upset at me or I'd be frustrated with my life or other people, that so much of it came back to this. But then I realized that's just not good advice for pastors. I mean, it's good advice for everyone. And this is kind of at the root of what we will be talking about here. And this particular study, and we'll be pulling, I mean, really from a book by John Ortberg called Soul Keeping, and the study questions come from there as well. But when I read it, there were some things in there that really resonated with me. And he wrote this in his introduction, and when he was wrestling with these same issues, and maybe because he's a pastor, that I could relate to these things. So he was frustrated at some point in his life, and he said, why is it so hard for me to love the actual people in my church? Why is it that I know I want to love my children, but I seem to be driven to be a success, especially in a vocation supposedly calling people to die to their need to be successful? Why do I get jealous of other pastors who are more successful than I am? Why am I never satisfied? Why do I feel a deep secret loneliness? Why is it that I have a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's of divinity and work as a pastor, and yet I am not sure who I am? And he spoke to one of his mentors, a guy named Dallas Willard, who will be referred to a good handful of times here. And what this wise mentor told him is, he said, The most important thing in your life is not what you do. It is who you become. It is who you become. That's what you will take into eternity. You are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. Your soul is not just something that lives on after your body dies. It's the most important thing about you. It is your life. That you are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. Do you believe that? Have you ever heard anything like that? And that this is the most important thing about you. So we'll talk about our soul. We'll talk about all of these things. And let me start by reading a little story that John Ortberg tells. He says, there once was a town high in the Alps that straddled the banks of a beautiful stream. The stream was fed by springs that were as old as the earth and deep as the sea. The water was clear like crystal. Children laughed and played beside it. Swans and geese swam on it. You could see the rocks in the sand and the rainbow trout that swarmed at the bottom of the stream. High in the hills, far beyond anyone's sight, lived an old man who served as keeper of the springs. He had been hired so long ago that now no one could remember a time when he was not there. He would travel from one spring to another in the hills, removing branches or fallen leaves or debris that might pollute the water, but his work was unseen. One year, the town council decided they had better things to do with their money. No one supervised the old man anyway. They had roads to repair and taxes to collect and services to offer, and giving money to an unseen stream cleaner seemed like a luxury they could no longer afford. So the old man left his post. High in the mountains, the spring went untended. Twigs and branches and worse, muddied liquid flow. Mud and silt compacted the creek bed. Waste formed, turned into parts of the stream into stagnant bogs. For a time, no one in the village noticed, but after a while, the water was not the same. It began to look brackish. The swans flew away to live elsewhere. The water no longer had a crisp scent that drew children to play in it. Some people in town began to grow ill. All noticed the loss of sparkling beauty that used to flow between the banks of the streams that fed the town. The life of the village depended on the stream, and the life of the stream depended on the keeper. The city council reconvened. The money was found. The old man was rehired. After yet another time, the springs were clean. The stream was pure. Children played again on its banks. Illness was replaced by health. The swans came home, and the village came back to life. The life of a village depended on the health of the stream. The stream is your soul, and you are the keeper. You are the keeper. Your life depends on it. And no one else can do that for you. So we're going to talk about that for our series. Your soul. So what is your soul? There is that prayer that says, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That's kind of interesting nursery rhyme that you would say to little kids. I mean, could be kind of spooky to say by yourself in the dark when you're 7 years old. But what is it? What are you actually praying for the Lord to take? If I pray that if I do die before I wake, that the Lord would take my soul, what does that mean? What does that mean? So what is the soul? If you were to ask, and they've done these surveys to ask people who go to church regularly like all of us, do you believe that we have souls? And almost everyone in church says, yes, we do have souls. And then they were asked, well, can you tell me what a soul is? What is a soul? What is your soul? And then people kind of didn't know what to say. It's like, I believe in it, but I just don't really know how to explain it. So what is it? What is it, and why is it so important? Why does it matter at all? It's interesting that if you look through our pop culture, that people do talk about the soul all the time. There are a lot of products or phrases that we use to talk about the soul. We talk about soul food, soul music. There's a Kia soul. We talk about finding our soulmate. So it's not something that will really go away, because somewhere deep inside of us it kind of resonates that, yeah, we have a soul. Maybe I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it's something really important. And we have an outer life. Each one of us has an outer life. So the outer life is what you see, what you will see about me. So it's the way that I look, it's my body, it's my reputation, it's my job. Every one of us has an outer life. And yet, every one of us also has an inner life. An inner life, our thoughts, our feelings, our will, other things that no one really has access to except yourself and God. So part of our inner life, and it relates to our inner life as well. In fact, they talk. Have been a good number of movies that talk about people who have sold their soul for something, Bedazzled or Damn Yankees, or even in The Simpsons, that Homer Simpson sold his soul to the devil for a donut. And then he kind of impulsively ate it all, and then he realized it, so he had one little piece left, so he put it in the refrigerator and said, "Soul donut, do not eat." He actually did end up eating it right after that because he's Homer Simpson, but it just is in the pop culture there. And I realized this as well, and began kind of my own journey of thinking about this. Probably more than 15 years ago or so, I was, after the church had been started and I was busy and things were going okay, but I was frustrated with some things and some relationships and just stuff that was going on. And in my mind, I felt like, if I could just get all the circumstances in my life okay, then I'm going to feel better. I'm going to be at peace. And I went to go talk to a really good Christian counselor who's actually written some books after that. He was recommended to me. He had been a pastor before and really had a heart for pastors. So I went to talk to him, and he was very, very wise. And kind of one of the things that I took away from that, I went into him trying to ask, how can I change my outer world so that I'm not going to be frustrated and feel the way that I do? But one of the things that was revealed to me was that no matter what the changes I did to my outer world, those just by themselves were not going to change my inner world. Changing my circumstances, changing how successful I thought I was, changing a lot of these things wasn't going to change kind of the frustration I was feeling, because that was something that was a little bit deeper and had to do with my own soul and had to do with my relationship with God. And that was one of the great takeaways that I got from that. John Ortberg said a similar thing, and when he talks to Dallas Willard, that Dallas Willard told him, he said that what matters most is your soul. That is what marks your existence. And this is why human life matters so much, and it's because of this tiny, vulnerable, precious thing you call your soul. That you are not just yourself, but you are a soul, and your soul has been made by God and for God, and it is made to run on God, which means that you are not meant to be self-sufficient. And this is remarkable and true, and even in some ways just challenging and disturbing as well. In the 20th century, there have been some studies about the rise of depression, and one of the studies said that over every generation has become 3 times more likely to be depressed, which is interesting because in many ways life has got easier. There has been a rise in the mental health profession, so there are more counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists. People seem to have more free time, and yet every generation that there seems to be a higher and higher incidence of depression. And then part of the reason why is because, and this is what some Christian psychologists say, is because we have tried to put all our hopes and expectations on ourself. That in the past there were other things that we looked to. There was community, there was society, there was church, there was faith, but ourself, just who we are apart from God, that is not meant to bear all that weight and all those expectations. That if you think about it and you look at the way that many people look at, and even the language that we use, that if you are stressed out, then you say, well, you need to take care of yourself. If you're on a job interview, that you are supposed to believe in yourself. If you are not getting your way, that you are supposed to stand up for yourself. If you go out on a date, you are supposed to be yourself. If you are headed to the tattoo parlor, you are supposed to express yourself. Right? So we talk about all these things about ourselves, and if you go to Barnes & Noble or you go to a bookstore, there's a huge section that will be self-help books about how do you help yourself. But in some ways, I mean, and I'm all for trying to help yourself and improve yourself, but there are some things that on our own, apart from God, that we are not able to do. It's almost trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So if you are trying to do all these things and you're only hoping and you only view in these terms of yourself, that you will find yourself incapable many times. And how about this? What if yourself is just a mess? What if you have problems and baggage and issues? I mean, how is that going to help when you express that self? That there is something greater and more important than that, and that is your soul. So your soul, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like yourself is just who you are, but your soul is you in your entirety and how you relate to God. That God comes into the picture when we are talking about our soul. And we'll talk about the anatomy of a person and how this wraps up in just a little bit more. But there is a part of us, I think, if we just reflect, that is really aware of our souls. That have you ever had some type of experience that you just knew that just science or just even your senses didn't fully explain? For example, I mean, one of the early times that I can remember this, when I was in high school, or maybe it's junior high, ninth grade or so, that went to a famous Boy Scout camp in New Mexico. It's called Philmont, and I think it's the largest scout camp. It's like 300 square miles or something, and just rugged terrain, mountains. You can go horseback riding, and you hike for like a week, and there's like no showers or anything, but you're out there like totally isolated. And I remember one of the nights I was lying just staring up at the sky. And you know how it is, like when we're in the city, you can't really see a bunch of stars. I mean, you see a few, but if you've ever been like in the desert or someplace and you look up and the sky is just filled with stars, and they're so bright and crisp and clear. And at that time I was learning about how so many of these stars are actually like galaxies in themselves. They're not just one star. And I looked up and I thought, wow, the universe is so huge, and I'm like this one person in here. And it gave me a sense of the size and the scope and the greatness of God. And maybe you've had some of those experiences, and that's not just something that is explained by science, right? It's something that resonates in your soul, where you become aware of something greater than you are. Or maybe you've had an experience like this, that you're a new parent, and that you look at your child who is born, this newborn infant, and there's a sense that, you know what, this is not a product of just like blind evolution or chance. This is not just a bunch of chemicals or flesh, that there is a body here and a soul here, and it's a total miracle. and you know that this isn't chance, and you get a sense of something greater than you, that there's a God out there, and that he's a good God and a loving God. And maybe you think about the love that you have for this child as a father or a mother, and it strikes you that maybe there's a God out there who loves me in an even greater way. And in those moments, there's something that's not just in our heads, but really in our hearts and our soul. And that is evidence of something greater there, that we are not just our bodies, we're not just our brains or even our minds, that we have a soul. And the most important thing that we can do is to understand this and have a healthy soul so that we can relate to God in a healthy way, that there is a depth to these types of experiences. And so it is very helpful to understand, just like with anything, if you want to take care of anything, if you're going to take care of your car or an animal or a pet that you have or whatever, you kind of have to know how it works. How does it tick? What keeps it healthy? So it's important to see how a soul works. This goes back to the other point I said, but if yours, and this is why this is important, if your soul is healthy, excuse me, no external circumstance can destroy your life. If your soul is unhealthy, no external circumstance can redeem it. And you have met people, right? And maybe their external circumstances are very dire because of health or finances or something, and yet you sense a stability and a health to their soul. And you've met other people too who probably have been blessed with a lot of stuff, maybe a lot of money and opportunity, and that they just don't seem like they are in a good place. So to have a healthy soul is so important. So in your notes here, there's a diagram, and I don't know if you can see it all that clearly, but we'll explain it. You can look at, perhaps this is one way of understanding how we are as people, the anatomy of a person. And this is talked about in soul keeping as well as a renovation of the heart. I know some of the guys went through that study as well. But you can understand in a series of kind of like concentric circles that if you look at the innermost part of a person is their will. That is the capacity to choose. And we all have that, like free will. You can choose to do this or choose not to do this. And that having this capacity to choose is what makes you different than a rock or another animal, that we have free will. This is part of what it means to be created in the image of God, that we have a choice. In the beginning, that God gives a charge to the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and says that they are to exercise dominion over the world. And that is part of what this will is. So exercising dominion, making these choices, is an act of the will. So you might ask this question, well, if we do have a free will, then why don't we just choose to do the right thing all the time? And by experience, we know it just does not really work that way. That the will is very powerful and sacred, but it is limited. It is limited. The will by itself is very limited. And this is, we all know this to be true. Anytime you have said, you know what, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week, or I'm going to go on a diet, and then that was an exercise of your will. This is what you chose to do, but somehow we get sidetracked. So our will is very limited, and what happens is that, as I said, it's good, but it's limited, so that the other patterns and habits and our personal history, that at times that those things just kind of override our will. If you've ever just reacted and exploded at someone and then you regretted it later, this is because there are other parts of us too, and habits that we have and things that happen that kind of override that will. But it's important first that we have to acknowledge that we have a will. So because it's limited, sometimes we do things that we know are bad for ourselves. Eat the 3rd piece of chocolate cake when we know I shouldn't do this, but we do it, and we do things that are counterproductive. So if you try, and I know I've done this before, just by just sheer willpower to change everything in my life, it does not work. And actually what happens is it's really discouraging, and you tire yourself out, and you really irritate all the people around you as well, because you just get frustrated just trying to do this as well on your own. So it's important to acknowledge the will. Then there's the second circle, which is the mind. So the mind in biblical times and in biblical language, when you see the word mind, that it really is bigger than just what we think of as our mind here, but it refers to our thoughts as well as our feelings as well. So that's what the mind is, our thoughts and our feelings. So our thoughts are it's just all the ways that we are conscious of things. And once again, if you've ever had thoughts that you regretted, it's because that thoughts and emotions are very powerful, and they can override our will as well. Romans 8:6 says, "The mind of the sinful person is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace." The mind of the sinful person is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. So that when we begin to work through our will, and then our mind is not filled is not totally sinful, but when it's controlled by the Holy Spirit, that starts to begin this process of life and peace. And I think all of us, in many ways, we're really seeking peace. We want peace. And we want peace, and we should know, too, that peace is available. That peace is available right here, right now, and the process begins with this transformed mind. As I said before, at times I've thought, well, when my circumstances change, then I'll have peace. But you need to know that you can have peace no matter what your circumstances are. And that God, whenever He blesses people, He blesses them where they are at that time, not at some future time. So that peace is available to you wherever you are. The third circle there is the body. So the mind, or the will, the mind, and the body. So our bodies are like our self-contained power packs there, that we would not be who we are without a body. Each one of us has a body, and that our bodies are filled with a bunch of appetites and habits from just the way that we've lived and the things that we've done. And it's great to have a body, and the body, once again, is very powerful as well. And the way this works is after we kind of learn some things, after we do some things, we begin to develop habits and patterns as well. And after we've developed this, it's kind of like we can outsource our will to our body. So, for example, when you start learning how to drive a car, you have to pay very close attention. You're very mindful, 8 and 12 on the steering wheel, look both sides, and you don't want to listen to the radio or talk to anyone because you're really concentrating on driving that car. And then after you do that for a while, you have become skilled in that area, that you have developed skills and habits in your body that allow you to do other things while you are driving. So you can listen to the radio, you can have a conversation. Some people try and text, but Dave Maggard told me that I should never text when I drive, so I never do. But because even though we try to, but we start thinking, because we have outsourced that and we are able to do some other things. So this helps us grow and learn some other skills as well. So it's really good, but it's also possible that we have developed bad habits and bad ways of thinking as well, and those become ingrained in us, and we tend to default to those. But even then, we are not only our bodies. And then the last circle there is the soul. The soul is what integrates all these parts together. And what what the soul really seeks is unity and harmony. The soul is what connects all these different parts into one single person. So integrity, which is related to being integrated, that's like a deep soul word. When we have integrity, then what we say and who we are consistent. And that's just the way we are, and that's the way we live. So the human soul is what integrates our wills and our minds and our thoughts and our feelings and our body into one whole integrated person, into an integrated soul. So a healthy soul is an integrated soul, using this language, and an unhealthy soul is a disintegrated soul. And when I think about this idea of having an integrated soul, to think about having the thoughts that honor God, having my will in accordance to that, having my body prepared and able to do all these things together, I mean, that is a great vision to me. That is very attractive, to have that type of life, to have a life of integrity in these terms. That is something worth striving for. And yet, we look around and we can see that we live in a world of many people with, disintegrated souls, where the body and the mind and the will are all fractured, and there is no peace there because there is no harmony, there's no integration in these parts. Jesus talks about this as well. Mark 8:36. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit or lose his soul? What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit or lose his soul? And I know when I read this the first time many, many decades ago, that my first understanding of this is, what good is it if you become super rich and get a whole bunch of stuff, but then you go to hell? You lose your soul. And that's not really what Jesus is talking about here. He's really talking that this is almost like a description or a diagnostic expression. He said that if I gain everything that I want, all the stuff, all the experiences, whatever I want, but in the end that my will and my soul is disintegrated, that I will never have peace, I will never have life, that I will lose my soul in the sense that I can't even find my soul because it's all scattered all over the place. So to lose my soul means that I don't have a healthy integrated center, and it would be like I would be in a car without a steering wheel. I'd be going someplace but have no direction or no control over that. So you can gain a whole bunch of things, but if you lose that center, that soul, then you will have lost the most important thing about yourself. So he says, don't do that. You don't want to gain everything in the world at the expense of becoming a splintered, disintegrated soul with no harmony. That's what he's saying there. In the Midwest, there were farmers that when there would be like a big snowstorm, like a whiteout, that would be so strong that you couldn't even see, and this would happen back there, that they might just be going to the barn, but they would lay a rope from their front door to wherever they were going, because even though it might only be a few feet away, that there were instances of people who froze to death because they couldn't find their way back. So they would put this rope and go with it to wherever they're going so they could always find their way back. And in some sense, that we live in a blizzard of a world, and there's a snowstorm, almost like a whiteout there, and what we need is that rope that brings us back home, that brings us back to God. And you don't even have to believe in the Bible to just realize how important this is, to understand the importance of having a soul that is integrated together. John Ortberg gives an example of this. He says, think of the mom who struggles to create the perfect home. Her husband maybe doesn't help much. She doesn't tell him how much she resents it, mostly because she's always been afraid of conflict. She is angry at her children for not being perfect, for not getting on track to get into the right schools, for not making her look good as a mom. She is angry at her body for aging. Feeling attractive has been the one sense of worth in her life, and it is being taken away. She withdraws. She drinks a little too much. She gossips with some of her friends and some of her other friends about some of her other friends. She finds ways to fill time by escapist behavior. She thinks that her problem is her husband or her kids or her age or her body, but it's not. It is her soul. That's a disintegrated soul. I did a memorial service not too long ago, but this was for someone who was like kind of a distant relative. And I had heard about this person, but I had never met him because supposedly he was like the smartest guy you'd ever meet. And then sometime like in his 20s, he just got upset with the whole world, and he left his family, and he never had contact with his parents again. And in fact, I had officiated his father's funeral service, and he didn't even come to that. So when I was preparing for this service for the guy that I had never met before, and part of what I do is to meet with the family and just talk and try and get a sense of the person, and it's always difficult if you've never had a chance to meet him, so you ask questions like, what is this person like, and tell me things about him. And what's great is when there's someone who has a healthy soul and you're able to do a funeral service for them because you just sense that peace and a good life. But this wasn't the case in this time, so I'm trying to like find the best things about this guy's life. And I said, well, tell me about him or what you remember. And people just kind of like looked at each other and said, well, he liked science fiction, and he used to go to church, and they were just like kind of scraping the barrel to find some things. I mean, I was just sad, really. I mean, it was sad, and he was a successful person in what he did, and yet that could be an example of gaining much in the world and yet losing your soul. That's not, as I said, it's not going to hell, but what it is just being a disintegrated person, not living a good life. Romans 7:18, Paul says, "For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out." I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. And this could describe much of the human condition, that we do have this desire, but because of this disintegrated soul, and this has to do with sin and our brokenness and our fallenness, that we are not even able to do what we would like to do. When John Ortberg was wrestling with all of this, he went to talk to Dallas Willard about, well, how do we start getting our soul healthy? How do we do this? And what he said was that you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And I think John Ortberg kind of had the same reaction as I did when my seminary professor told me to work on my baggage there. He said, well, what does this have to do with anything? It's interesting about hurry, and there's a difference between being hurry and being busy. In the 1960s, there were some studies on how things were progressing in the United States, and they did a report on time management and efficiency and being effective. And actually in the 60s, they said, we are getting so efficient with things that in about 30 years, the biggest problem people are going to have is what are they going to do with all their free time? Because we're here, 50 years later, and no one has told me that is the big problem in their life. And the reason why is because it's not really a matter of how much things we have to do, but really this sense of being hurried is a soul issue. It's not our circumstances. We think it's our circumstances. So being hurried is a problem of the soul. What being hurried is, so being busy is having a lot of things to do, and we all go through seasons of busyness. But being hurried is a problem of the soul. Being hurried is becoming so preoccupied with what I have to do and with myself. It begins to turn inward, right? That I am no longer fully able to be present with God and with other people. That's what hurried is. So if you're not able to be present, that you're always distracted, that is a sign that you might be very, very hurried. When I was at my 20th high school class reunion, I was there and I'd seen some people I hadn't seen for a long time. So I was talking to this guy I hadn't seen since high school. I played on the basketball team with him together, so I was talking to him, and he's just like looking over my shoulder all the time for other people to talk to, like the cheerleaders or whoever was popular back then. And I'm looking at him, and he was like present with me in body. And maybe you've seen this, they're just like looking around all over the place. So it's like, I shouldn't even be talking to this guy because he's not present with me, that he had other things. He was preoccupied with something else. When we are hurried, we are preoccupied with other things, and we may say we're present with God, but we're distracted. We sit down to pray or read the Bible, and our mind is a million other places. And that's because of this sense of hurry. This is a soul issue here. This is a soul issue. And what Dallas Willard said is, a soul cannot thrive. A soul cannot be healthy if it is hurried. And I believe that to the core of my being, that if I am distracted all the time, if I am not present, and being present with someone is such a gift, and it's what we should be doing and what we should be privileged to do with other people and with God, that is a gift, to be fully present. But if we are hurried, that we are not able to do this. Nobody is going to unhurry your life or your soul for you. Nobody is going to sprinkle time dust in your life, and that wouldn't even help if it could. That when you are hurried, that this is part of the thing that really disintegrates our soul. Part of what caring for our soul is to become unhurried, to be able to be fully present with God. That caring for your soul and allowing it to flourish in God's presence, that is a gift to God and a gift to others. And it is our primary charge and our challenge that faces us. Last thing. You might have heard of Horatio Spafford, and he lived in the 1800s. There was a great Chicago fire. He had been very wealthy in real estate. He lost everything. He had a son who died of scarlet fever, so he sent his wife and his 4 daughters back to England while he tried to gather all his finances and everything. And then he received a telegram from his wife that said, saved alone, what should I do? And the ship that was taking them across had sunk, and that only his wife survived and the 4 daughters had drowned. So he immediately got on a boat to go over to England. And then when he went over the spot that he believed that the ship had gone down, that he wrote the words to the famous hymn, "It is well with my soul. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." That in the midst of these terrible circumstances, that he could still say, it is well with my soul. Not it is well, or not that is good, or I am happy, but it is well with my soul. That whatever you are facing, it can still be well with your soul. The quote I read earlier, and maybe you can think about this, that this is something that is very important to dwell and know about your identity, that you are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. You are an unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe. This is who you are. This is who you are. That's the awesome glory and burden of having a soul, that your soul will go on forever and you are its keeper. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, it is an incredible gift that you have given us a soul, that you allow us to relate to you, that you loved us so much that you sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross so that we could relate to you and have an integrated, healthy, full soul, that we truly can honor you in all that we do and who we are, in our will, in our thoughts and emotions, in our bodies, that they can all give you glory. Lord, this is a huge challenge. It's difficult to understand at times, but we know we can do it with your help. So we ask out of your goodness and your grace and mercy, and we pray these things in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.